Welcome to the Blue Plate Diner, where comfort food meets small-town charm, and every plate tells a story, but sometimes. The diner isn't just a place for a meal, it's where tempers flare and tensions boil over. Today, we're diving into a dramatic encounter between Mark, a young waiter trying to keep it together, and a woman with an attitude that could cut through steel. What starts as a simple lunch shift soon escalates into chaos, and Mark's professionalism is put to the ultimate test. Stay tuned as we uncover how one seemingly ordinary day turned into an unforgettable showdown. The Blue Plate Diner was always bustling at lunch, a staple of the small town where everyone knew your name, and the comforting aroma of home-cooked food could make even the busiest day feel like a warm embrace. Mark had been working there for nearly a year, and while the job had its challenges, it always brought a sense of peace. The regulars greeted him with smiles, and the staff worked in harmony, ensuring that every meal was served with care. The diner was like a second home, a place where everyone came together, and the day was typically smooth, even when the place was full. But today, something felt different. It wasn't the usual steady hum of the diner. It wasn't the laughter and casual conversations filling the air. It was the arrival of Karen. She walked through the door, as she often did, but today felt like a storm had entered the room. Karen wasn't a new face at the Blue Plate. She had been coming in for years, though not with the same level of warmth that most customers had. She wasn't rude per se, but there was a certain sharpness to her, a presence that demanded attention. And for whatever reason, she was often quick to find something to complain about. She sat down at her usual booth by the window. Her teenage son slouched across from her, glued to his phone. Karen barely acknowledged the waiter as he approached, ordering the same thing she always had: a bowl of spaghetti, a side of garlic bread, and a salad. It wasn't the most exciting dish on the menu, but she seemed to enjoy it well enough. At least until something triggered her. Mark was in the thick of his shift, delivering orders with a smile, making small talk with regulars. He was calm, collected, and practiced, his movements efficient as he weaved between tables. He placed Karen's order in front of her with the usual courtesy, the plate of spaghetti steaming in the early afternoon heat. But the moment he set it down, he could feel the tension in the air, thick as fog. Karen stared at him for a beat longer than necessary, her eyes narrowing. Mark didn't think much of it at first. He'd been working here long enough to know that sometimes customers just needed a second to adjust. But then Karen's voice cut through the murmur of the diner. "Did you just smirk at me?" Mark froze, confused. "Sorry, ma'am." "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice soft, trying to stay calm. Her eyes were narrowed, like a hawk about to strike. "You looked at me funny. I don't appreciate that. This meal is ruined now. I demand it for free." A wave of disbelief washed over Mark. This was a first. He had been working here for months, and while he had faced a fair share of difficult customers, nothing like this had ever happened. He tried to explain himself, but Karen was not having it. "No, I want this meal free. You mocked me in front of everyone." Karen snapped, her tone rising with each word. She was beginning to draw attention, and the diners around her started to look up, sensing the escalation. Mark, still caught off guard, apologized once more and offered to take the meal back if there was an issue. But Karen's anger seemed to grow with every passing second. She stood up abruptly, her movements swift and furious. Without warning, she grabbed the plate of spaghetti, lifted it, and hurled it across the room. The plate shattered against the wall, sauce splattering everywhere. A collective gasp rippled through the diner, and the room fell into stunned silence. For a moment, time stood still. Mark stood frozen, staring at the mess, and then at Karen, who was now breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling with each breath. The entire diner was watching, waiting for something to happen. Then Jane, the manager, stepped in. She was a woman of few words but was known for her no-nonsense attitude. Her face was calm, but there was a steeliness in her eyes that made it clear she wasn't going to let this slide. "Ma'am," Jane began, her voice steady, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This behavior is unacceptable here. You'll be paying for that meal." Karen didn't even flinch. "I'm not paying for anything," she shot back, her voice cold, spiteful. "You'll regret this. You'll see. I'll make sure everyone knows what happened here today." The other diners were whispering among themselves, some glancing nervously at Karen, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Jane, unfazed by Karen's outburst, called for security. Karen's threats grew louder, but they fell on deaf ears as Jane calmly escorted her out of the diner. The tension in the room lingered long after Karen was gone. Mark stood there, unsure of what to do. He had never dealt with anything like this. His hands trembled slightly, and he felt the weight of the moment, the shock of the scene still settling in. Later, when the rush had slowed, Jane came over to check on him. "Hey, Mark," she said gently, her expression softening. "You did good. You kept your cool. And that's what matters." Mark didn't say anything at first. He was still processing the incident, replaying it in his mind, trying to make sense of it all. But Jane's words helped. They grounded him. He realized that he had done the right thing. Even though the situation had been impossible, he had remained calm. He had stayed professional, and that was all he could control. "I didn't know how to handle it," Mark admitted quietly, his voice tinged with self-doubt. "I just froze." "It's okay to be shaken up," Jane said. "But don't let people like her shake you. You can't control how others act, but you can control how you respond." Mark nodded, the weight on his shoulders easing just a bit. He had learned something that day, something that went beyond just the job. It was about dealing with difficult people, maintaining composure in the face of chaos, and knowing when to stand your ground. But the story didn't end there. A few hours later, Karen's online reviews began to flood in. She had taken to social media, posting a story about how she, a paying customer, had been assaulted by a young waiter at the Blue Plate. She painted herself as the victim, twisting the events to make it seem as though Mark had somehow provoked her. The accusations were wild, completely unfounded, but they spread quickly. The diner's phone rang off the hook, and customers began to question the credibility of the diner. Jane, ever calm, handled the situation with poise. She knew that the truth would eventually come out. The next day, Karen showed up again, this time with a man who introduced himself as her lawyer. The lawyer was polite but firm, demanding that the Blue Plate compensate Karen for the alleged trauma. He was met with a firm response from Jane, who calmly laid out the evidence: surveillance footage from the diner, witness statements from customers, and the fact that Karen had thrown food across the room. It was all there, crystal clear. The lawyer hesitated, realizing the evidence was stacked against Karen. "I'm afraid your client has no case," he said, his voice low. Karen's face turned red with anger as she stormed out. Defeated. The community, however, rallied around the Blue Plate. Support poured in from regulars and new customers alike, all of them showing their appreciation for the diner's integrity. Mark received an outpouring of kindness, with customers praising his professionalism and composure. The diner's reputation only strengthened, and Karen's attempts to ruin it had backfired spectacularly. As the days went on, Mark found himself more at peace with the whole ordeal. He had faced the storm and come out the other side stronger. The Blue Plate Diner continued to thrive, a beacon of community and support, built on the values of dignity and respect. And for Mark, the lesson was clear sometimes. The best way to handle chaos is with calm and confidence. No one could take that away from him.